I've been asked to be here today as the sort of the silver-tongued glad hand without any real technical knowledge here. And I've come for two reasons. One, because Maya Van Rossen asked me to come, and she is the Delaware Riverkeeper, head of the Delaware Riverkeeper Network, and one of the most committed environmentalists I know, and just a tireless advocate for the Delaware River and environmental issues generally. And so if she asked me to be part of this, I know it's important. And then the second reason is just the importance of buffer issues generally. This is an issue that comes before the legislature from time to time, efforts to compromise stream buffers. And although this presentation is going to be totally neutral, totally agnostic on legislative issues, there is legislation currently working through the legislature now relating to buffers. So it's an enormously important issue. It's a topical issue, and I was told that I don't want to get into the weeds on the buffer issue. I thought that was a little pun, into the weeds on the buffer issue. So I won't. Let me just thank the sponsors of this and let the people who know their stuff get on. The sponsors of this are the Delaware Riverkeeper Network, Maya, as we mentioned, Clean Water Action, American Rivers, Penn Future, and Pennsylvania Campaign for Clean Water. We have a good lineup of speakers. I won't take up any more of their time, and I'll let Maya do the rest of the introductions. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Representative Vitale, for that wonderful introduction. I am Maya Van Rossen. I'm the Delaware Riverkeeper, and I want to welcome you. And I'm just up here to introduce our first speaker and to let you know that we're going to have our speakers go first. And then after each of our speakers has made their presentations, we'll bring them back up for any questions and answers that you may have. We're going to start with Dr. Bern Sweeney. Dr. Sweeney is the director of the Stroud Water Research Center. Stroud is one of our nation's leading research organizations that is focused on the health of our freshwater systems. They are a leader regionally, and they are a leader nationally for freshwater ecosystems and on this issue of riparian buffers and their many important values for our communities. So, Bern?
Thanks, Maya, and I'll try to keep this non-technical, but to the point. Next slide. So we're going to talk about streamside forest buffers, but I want to give a little background and perspective to let you know how important this subject is for everyone in this room. Next slide. I want to remind everybody that the Clean Water Act of 1972 called for us to restore and maintain the chemical, physical, and biological integrity of the nation's waters. So that was the purpose of the Clean Water Act. Next slide. I also want to remind you that this is a picture of a graph in the latest EPA report on the health of the nation's waterways. This came out a few months ago, and they evaluate the health of the nation's waterways based on all the streams and rivers that are represented by dots in this graph. Next slide. The report is not good. Okay, the upper left-hand pie chart here shows that 55, you can't read it, but 55% of the streams and rivers were red, and that is they're in poor condition. 23.2% of the nation's rivers are in only fair condition, and only a small percentage are in what we would call good condition. In the eastern part of the country, where we're at right now, it's even worse than that. 62.7% of the streams in the east, including Pennsylvania, are in general in poor condition. Next slide. What does it mean to be in poor condition? Well, it means that the stream or river is no longer swimmable or fishable or appropriate for directly using for other kind of human activities. And to the plants and animals that live in the stream, it means that many of them have been extirpated. And so for a stream in poor condition in Pennsylvania, it means that 70% of the species that normally live there, whether they be plants or animals, are now gone. They've been eliminated by the degradation of the water quality. I don't know about you, but if I woke up in my neighborhood and found out that 70% of the residents moved out, I would think that something's wrong with the neighborhood. Well, something's wrong with the neighborhood here. Something's wrong with our streams. Next slide. So how are we doing with respect to the quality of water across the nation's the continent of the United States. Next slide. We're coming up short. And short is not good, not only in the fashion world, but it's not good when it comes to providing sustainable source of clean, fresh water to our current generation, our future generations. We can't afford to come up short. Next slide. The root of the problem is us. Everyone in this room, everyone is living in Pennsylvania, everyone living in the United States, everyone living in the world. Next slide. Lots of us. So by the year 2025, 8.5 billion people living on this planet. Now, we don't have billions of people living in Pennsylvania, but we have millions of people living in Pennsylvania. And guess what? The people in Pennsylvania are no different than the people elsewhere in the world. Every individual living in Pennsylvania needs a little piece of the watershed for three different things that are very important in their lives. The first part is, next slide, is that they need a piece of the watershed for their housing. So what's happened in Pennsylvania is that what was historically Penn's Woods, where every square foot almost of Pennsylvania was one big old-growth forest and you could drink the water out of streams, we have been eliminating very sequentially over the last 300 years that forest to make room for these different pieces of the watershed that we need to use. Next slide. So we need pieces of watershed. Each of us need a piece of the watershed for our housing, okay? So whether we live in a housing development like this or where we're living on a farm like this, we need a chunk of the watershed for that housing. Next slide. We need a piece of the watershed to do our business, whether we're working in the state capitol building like we are now, or a high-rise building in Philadelphia, or at an Amish sawmill. We need a little piece of the watershed to be cleared to do that business. Next slide. We also, the third thing is we need a piece of the watershed to grow our food, right? And so whether we're growing the food on a corporate farm like this or whether we're growing it on a Mennonite or an Amish farm like this, we need land and cleared land to grow that food. Next slide. So what we've been doing for 300 years has been gradually trading forest, Penn's Woods, next slide, for space for human activities. And that's okay because it's okay. We're occupying the space. We need to have space. We need to grow our food, have our business, and so on and so forth. But I can tell you as a scientist that whenever we trade forest for something other than forest in a watershed, water quality in the streams and rivers coming out of that watershed declines. That's a fact. I could show you graphs, I can tell you technical papers on that. It's a fact. Next slide. So here's the burning question. Here's the question that we're sitting around a table today. Can we use all this land for all these things I just talked about, housing, business, and food, and still have clean, fresh water available for humans and for wildlife? Next slide. I say the answer is yes. And that's not because I'm an optimist. I'm a scientist, but we have the technology to do this. We need the wherewithal to apply that technology. Next slide. It's pretty simple. The most effective and fundamental thing we can do is just create a little space between the things that we're doing and the things that we're trying to protect. And in this case, in this room today, it's water and water quality. Next slide. This is a photograph of Burns Sweeney's hand running Burns Sweeney's power saw, okay? And the question I ask you is, I propose to you, this is a very dangerous piece of equipment. This is the dangerous part of this thing, right? The saw blade. This thing can cut my finger off in a split second. And I ask you this question: how is it possible for Burns Sweeney, a scientist, not a carpenter, to use this piece of equipment for 3 or 4 hours straight on a Saturday morning and not cut my fingers off? It's built into the design of the equipment, right? So we put a little bit of space between the dangerous thing that we're doing and what we're trying to protect. In this case, a couple of inches, right? But we also put something in that space that makes that space even more effective. In this case, it's steel. So a little bit of space between a dangerous thing and what I'm trying to protect and some steel in that space. Next slide. The same thing applies to the kind of things that humans are doing out on this landscape. So in this case, we're growing corn, right? So here is the dangerous activity that humans are doing. Here's what we're trying to protect, the water in the stream. Why? Because if you go 12 miles down from this point, this water goes into the city of Newark as drinking water. Now, many of you might say this is not a dangerous activity, right? Growing corn, what's so dangerous about growing corn? Well, we put chemicals on that corn, we put fertilizer in that corn, and if I were to take a gallon jug that's sitting on this table right here and fill it with, say, atrazine, which is widely used on corn, and offered everybody in this room a $500 bill to anyone who would sit there and drink that gallon of water, nobody would do it. Why? Because you know you're going to die, because that chemical is unsafe. But we have to make sure that that chemical doesn't make its way down into the drinking water of the people that are downstream from us, right? So this is not enough space between this dangerous activity and what we're trying to protect in order to assure that that bad stuff doesn't get in there, that we don't harm the public. Next space. So what we need to do is create a buffer. A buffer is just a space between what we're trying to do, either grow corn or have a housing development or have cattle or whatever, have an industrial complex, and what we're trying to protect, the stream. So it's just moving that activity back a little bit and putting something in there that will add protection. For the power saw, it was steel. In this case, it's trees. Trees are the best thing we can put in that space, and I'll tell you why in a few minutes. Next. So what is a streamside buffer? What is a streamside forest buffer? Next slide. It's a best management practice for keeping stuff out of streams. So stuff is this great word that in this context means pharmaceuticals, pesticides, fertilizers, things that are, grease, oil, things that are related to human activities that are washing towards our streams. So we need to keep that stuff out of there. So that's the general definition of a streamside forest buffer that I think everybody around this room would probably embrace. Next slide. Wrong. Because that's only part of it. That's only half of it. Maybe it's not even completely half of it. Okay, so keeping stuff out of streams is only half of it. Next slide. We want to keep stuff out of streams with a buffer, and we want to improve the health of the stream itself so that it can process pollutants for us. So we want to keep the stuff out, and we want to put the stream in a position to process things that are going to get into it, because things will get into it. Next slide. I want to show you two case studies, that both of which were done in Pennsylvania, to convince you that this is not something, some science is being done elsewhere in the United States and maybe isn't appropriate for our state. So these are two case studies in Pennsylvania to prove this point. Next slide. So the first one is this aspect of keeping stuff out of streams. Can a buffer keep things out of streams? So this is a study that Stroud started back in 1990, okay? At that time, there was a cornfield and the corn was being grown all the way down to the edge of a stream. We moved the corn upslope 100 feet. We planted the cornfield in trees, 18-inch seedlings, and we let the trees grow up into a forest. And we studied what happened to the chemicals that move off of this cornfield towards that stream over the next 20 years. Next slide. And by the way, this has been published in the technical papers in the back of the room. Here are the average results after 18 years of that study. Nitrogen, which is one of the major polluters in the continental United States and in Pennsylvania, Chesapeake Bay in particular, 26% removal of the nitrogen that was putting on those fields by that simple little space of trees. Sediment, suspended sediments, 43% removal on average by this buffer. Next slide. So this is a good news, bad news story, right? So if 26% of the nitrogen is being removed, what does that mean? Well, that's good, but it means that 74% of the nitrogen is still getting into the stream. This is why we talk about the other side of buffers, that we need the stream to be able to process stuff also. 43% of the sediment is being removed, but 57% still getting in. Okay, it's a good news, bad news story. Next slide. So the conclusion based on that work a couple of years ago was that no matter how good the best management practice is on the landscape, we're not going to be able to keep everything from getting into the stream. So we need the stream itself to act as sort of the second line of defense for keeping things and stuff from going down and getting into our drinking water systems and into our wildlife areas. Next slide. So case study number 2 addresses this other aspect of buffers, and that is, can the forest buffer itself actually help a stream more effectively and efficiently process pollutants? And the answer, of course, is yes. And so this is a study we did a couple of years ago on the southeastern part of Pennsylvania. 18 streams selected at random. We took advantage of the fact that Penn's Woods is no longer a Penn's Wood. It no longer stretches from Pittsburgh all the way to Philadelphia as one big forest. It exists as patches of forest. And so what Pennsylvania looks like in a lot of areas are little patches of forest on the landscape. And the streams flow into a patch, out of a patch, into a patch, out of a patch. So what we did was we went in and said, okay, how does the quality of this stream look right here, where there are no trees along it, versus right here, where there is a bank of forest on either side? Same amount of water for all practical purposes, because we're only talking about a couple hundred yards distance here. Same water chemistry, no trees with trees. What does that tell us? Next slide. It told us a bunch of things. One, it told us that when you have trees on the banks of a stream, the stream is much more stable. The banks of the stream will not slough into the water when it rains and the water levels rise. And so this is a much more stable condition than this. These banks will fall into the stream, and the sediment will wash downstream with almost every rainstorm. Next slide. We also learned that when a stream is forested, the channel is much wider than when the stream is deforested. So the stream, like in this case, is 18 feet wide. 100 yards upstream from this point where there is no trees, the stream is only 1 yard wide. The stream is narrow. And you say to yourself, what difference does that make? Who cares if a stream's wide or narrow? Well, when a stream's wide, it has more bottom area per unit length. And the bottom of the stream is where we process pollutants. So the more bottom area you have in these small streams, the more pollutants you're going to process. Next slide. The third point we learned from this comparison was that forested streams, if they're shaded by trees, have a much more natural temperature pattern. And that means that they can support the native plants and animals that are supposed to be in our streams in Pennsylvania. Because Pennsylvania streams were historically forested and cool for 10,000 years. It's only the last 300 years that we've removed the trees and warmed them up. Next slide. The fourth point we make is that forested streams are shaded and they grow better algae. The kind of food that's available in a stream ecosystem affects how well it can process stuff. How well the nutrition is of the workers in this Capitol building dictates how well they're going to work. The same thing happens in stream ecosystems. Next slide. The last point is that forested streams receive a lot of leaf litter from the overhanging canopy, and that's good. That's food material, provides a healthy stream. All these points add up to a conclusion. Next slide. Conclusion that when you have trees on the banks of a stream, the ecosystem, the plants, the animals, the fungi, the bacteria, are in a much healthier and a much more vibrant condition and can process stuff that gets in them. And that stuff are pharmaceuticals, agrochemicals, all kinds of toxic materials. Stream ecosystems can process that stuff if it's healthy. Next slide. So how wide does this streamside forest buffer need to be? This is like the burning question, right? How wide from the stream do we need to go out with this forest? Next slide. Well, a colleague of mine, Dennis Newbold, and myself just finished an exhaustive literature review on this subject. We looked at over 500 scientific studies. Half of them we had to throw out because they were poorly designed or poorly executed, but half of them, in fact, 238 were valid studies, and we reviewed them. Next slide. And they are going to be published. They've been accepted for publication in a peer-reviewed journal. That journal is coming out in 2 months. There's 6 copies of this manuscript in the back of the room that's going to be in print within 2 months. 238 scientific studies reviewed, 8 factors that we looked at: nitrate removal effectiveness, sediment trapping efficiency of the buffer, stream width optimization, channel erosion protection, temperature control, woody habitat, macroinvertebrate health, and fish health. All those are in the paper. All the studies that exist today that bear on how wide a buffer needs to protect those things are in that paper. Next slide. This is the quote from the abstract. It's the last sentence of the abstract, and it says, this is the concluding statement: overall, buffers greater or equal than 30 meters, which is 100 feet wide, are needed to protect the physical, chemical, and biological integrity of small streams. 100 feet wide is what at least 100 feet wide. Next slide. Greater than or equal to 30 meters or 100 feet wide means equal to or greater than. It doesn't mean less than. So the science is saying we need 100 feet or more to adequately protect our small streams and rivers. Next slide. So one row of trees along this is a small stream in Pennsylvania. One row of trees on either side of that small stream is not a streamside forest buffer. It helps. It's certainly better than no trees, but it's not what the science is saying we need as a streamside forest buffer. Next slide. I want to remind you one final point before I close. 100 feet is the minimum, right? When the engineers designed this building that we're in today, they figured out the strength of materials that were needed to support this structure, and then they doubled it. Doubling the strength of materials used for a structure is sort of standard engineering practice. It's a safety factor that they build in because they do not want this building to collapse and kill people. So they double the strength of the materials. Next slide. So I say to you, I just told you that this water, 12 miles downstream, goes in as an intake pipe to provide all the citizens of Newcastle County, Delaware, with drinking water. Next slide. So I say to you, for the greater public good, the engineers have not been allowed to cut corners in designing these buildings because they don't want to harm the public. But for some reason, we have constantly been cutting corners on this aspect of public safety. We're always saying, oh, the science is saying 100 feet, but what can we get away with? How about 35 feet? How about 50 feet? What we should be saying is, oh, the science is saying 100 feet, let's build a safety factor in. Let's make it 150 feet. Let's make it 200 feet. Thank you for listening.
So I've learned that we're going to lose Representative Vitale before the end of today's session. So I did want to take a moment to thank him for helping to set up today. He was very gracious in giving credit to all of the organization that helped set up today's event. But actually, Representative Vitale in his office was very, very helpful and exercised a lot of leadership in making sure today happened, along with all the other great leadership he shows us on environmental issues every day. So I did want to recognize that and thank him before we lost him. And so our second speaker has just arrived. He's back there in the audience. He is Mayor Richard Gray. He is the mayor of the city of Lancaster, and he really has been a true leader regionally and nationally on effective and progressive stormwater management for towns. And so I'd like to invite Mayor Gray up to come speak with us. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here and talk about a topic that's important to us. In the city of Lancaster, we have a combined stormwater wastewater system, which I think about 150 cities in the United States have, which means that when there's a heavy downpour, heavy rain, our processing plant cannot process. It's just too much water. What we do instead is screen and dump raw sewage basically directly into the Conestoga River, which goes to the Susquehanna River, which goes to the Chesapeake Bay, which brings us here. We're not alone in this. There's many other cities, again, in the United States and in Pennsylvania, older cities. At one time, this was considered really an ecologically appropriate way to do things, because what you would do is you would dilute sewage with stormwater before you dumped it. Well, in 1906, the City Council of Lancaster looked at separating our stormwater and wastewater system, and decided that $2 million was too much to spend. Now, I'm sure it was a lot more money then, but probably $2 billion couldn't do it today. We've looked at various ways to deal with this. One of them is gray infrastructure, which is basically you build huge holding tanks, and when the demand is made on the system, you just hold it and then process it later. That would cost us in the neighborhood of $300 million to do that for the city of Lancaster. We'd have to build 2 huge holding tanks. In addition, would have the annual cost of treating the rainwater that we took and combined it with sewerage and polluted. We would then have the additional costs of trying to clean it up again before we put it in the Conestoga. What we've done instead of doing that is embark on a program of green infrastructure. And basically what green infrastructure is if you take stormwater and combine it with sewerage and then try to treat it to make it pure again, why not just skip the middleman, so to speak, and keep the stormwater out of the system in the first place? How do we work to keep the stormwater from going into the combined stormwater wastewater system so we don't have to treat it? And this is basically green infrastructure. Some places it's called sustainability. In Lancaster, we're sort of old-fashioned. We call it stewardship, and we don't feel we have the right to pollute and destroy things for future generations. We have an obligation to take steps. Once we decided we were going to do green infrastructure, we hired a consultant, CH2M Hill, which has taken me 3 years to be able to get that name out. I can't believe I can do it now. But we hired a consultant and came up with a 25-year plan to implement green infrastructure steps. Charlotte Katzenmoyer, our Director of Public Works, is here with me. We employ what we call integrated infrastructure now, which means anything we do to our infrastructure, we look at it as to how we can green it, how we can do it in a way so as to eliminate stormwater. And just to give you some quick examples, we've redone 4 parks in the city. All the parks have pervious basketball courts, drain fields underneath them. One of the parks takes 4.5 million gallons of stormwater a year and infiltrates it rather than put it in the stormwater system. Pipes run from around the park down underneath the basketball courts to the drain field that filter the stormwater, never let it get in our system. PennDOT gave us a grant, a red light grant from Philadelphia, which, hey, we'll take money from any place, to improve an intersection, which is a very dangerous intersection. We got some grants from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation and did it in such a way that it improved the entire neighborhood, made a nice big permeable patio for a microbrewery, and plus takes 2.5 million gallons a year of water in rain gardens out of our stormwater system. It's a 25-year program. EPA is coming on board. In fact, EPA has issued some provisional regulations that indicate that you can do these things through green infrastructure rather than just the old traditional gray infrastructure. And as we go along, we monitor how much it's costing us per gallon to do this. At this point, it'll cost us over 25 years about half of what the long-term gray infrastructure would cost us, and I'm not even sure that includes the processing of the stormwater that we've polluted. Along with that, and to your topic today, we've included some riparian buffers. Now, people would say, where do they belong in a city? It sounds more like a farm thing. Well, we border along the Conestoga River, and we have a large public housing area that borders right along with it. Recently, we had a riparian buffer planning along there, and to get it right, we wanted to increase the tree canopy from 32% to 50%. We wanted to educate local residents about the many benefits of trees. So over 60 volunteers from the city, from Alcoa, people from the neighborhood, high school students came down. We planted 40 trees, bringing the total to 165 trees that we planted in this 13-acre property. As the trees mature, we estimate that it will reduce CO2 emissions by 65,000 pounds, and will take 400,000 gallons of water out of the stormwater wastewater system. Plus, it will reduce the amount of runoff from our streets and whatnot that continue to pollute the Conestoga and ergo the Susquehanna and Chesapeake. One of the things we would like to see is better planning at the state and federal level to protect the tree canopy, particularly along riparian buffers. Recently, federal energy law required PPL to remove over 145 trees within their power transmission right-of-way along the Conestoga River, just upstream from our water treatment plant. That this plant serves over 70,000 customers. This resulted in the loss of approximately 500,000 gallons of stormwater captured and increased the sediment load to our water and treatment plant, which increases the cost of our water treatment. Again, that was done. PPL didn't want to do it. PP&L were told that they had to do it. So it asked, really, I know you all don't have much to do with the federal regulation, but we have to think about those types of things when you do something with PPL and their right-of-way, the same as we think about them whenever we do any infrastructure in the city of Lancaster at all. So I just want you to know that greening is taking place in our cities. In fact, we've gone from the point where EPA had sort of a gun at our head with a consent order ready to go, to now where there are advocates, where they attempt to find us money to continue this project and really to measure the results. So that's what's happening in Lancaster. Thank you very much.
Great. And so now we're going to hear from our third and final speaker, Patty Elkus. Patty's the Deputy Director of Policy Planning and Programs at the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission, which really is one of our state's leading planning authorities focused on helping to connect elected officials with planning professionals as well as the public. So Patty?
Thank you, Maya. Thank you for inviting me here, and thanks everyone for attending today. I'm here to talk about the subject of buffers, but a little bit broader in terms of protected open space. And I've been a planner for 25 years, and I've done a lot of different types of planning, but I have to confess that open space is my favorite topic, so if I go on too long, just give me the yank. Okay. So I'm here specifically to talk about a project that we did that measured the economic value of protected open space. And we did this as a partnership between the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission and the Green Space Alliance. And DVRPC is the federally designated metropolitan planning organization for the greater Philadelphia area. And we do a lot of different things, but I would summarize what we do as working to improve transportation, promote smart growth, protect the environment, and build the economy. And the Green Space Alliance is a nonprofit organization that is made up of land trusts and government officials that work to promote the preservation and stewardship of open space. And together we did this, we actually initiated this a couple years ago at the turn of the recession, because we sensed that with the recession, with money getting very tight, that a lot of people were viewing protecting open space as something, sentimentally they liked, and it was a nice thing to do, it was pretty, but it didn't really provide an economic value, and in tough economic times, it was going to end up on the chopping block. So we conducted this study because we knew that there are economic benefits, and in fact, I'm going to be talking to you about them, and we are able to now show that protecting open space actually generates hundreds of millions of dollars in economic value, and it is a wise public investment that pays us back. So let me move on. The area that I'm talking about is southeastern Pennsylvania, including the counties of Bucks, Montgomery, Chester, Delaware, and Philadelphia. And so the numbers that I'm going to present are for those counties. But I just want to emphasize that these numbers are large and they pertain to this area, but if you're from a different part of Pennsylvania and we did a similar study, we'd come up with equally large numbers. So don't get too held up on that these numbers are for one part of the state and not another. So what we have in our region is about 240,000 acres of protected open space, and about half of that is parks, about 20% is preserve farms, and a third is land trust owned in these lands. And in terms of what that looks like, here's our whole 9-county region, including the Jersey side. But this shows the different types of protected open space, and you can see a couple concentrations. The brown represents preserved farmland that's mostly on the periphery of the region. The pink or purple are land trust lands, and you can see some big clusters in Chester County there. And then the other colors are different levels of parks, federal, state, county, municipal, and they're spread throughout the region. Actually, go back for a second. Sorry. So this is our existing protected open space, but we have, through regional planning efforts, identified another 200,000 acres that we would like to see protected in order to protect prime farmland and natural resources. And of course, getting there is going to be a big challenge. Because today's topic is buffers, I also created this map that does show where the protected open space overlaps onto our streams. And just the different colors show, for example, the pink is where land trust lands overlap streams, the yellow is farmland, and the orange are parklands. So this is showing where a lot of vegetative buffers can exist, but they don't always. So in terms of protecting that 200,000 acres, we have many challenges, and one of them is our land use patterns. And for us, in the last 30 years, we've been developing at the rate of an acre an hour, and that's what that looks like in terms of a map that shows the sprawling development pattern that we've encountered in southeastern Pennsylvania over the last couple decades. Now, our region is forecast to grow by another 500,000 people and 250,000 jobs. And together, if those new people and jobs consume land at the same rate as they have in the past, we'll consume another 150,000 acres of land over the next 30, 40 years. To put that in perspective, that is greater than all of Delaware County. So we would potentially pave over an area bigger than all of Delaware County over the next 30 to 40 years. However, don't get me wrong, because we actually really want our region to continue to attract people and jobs. But where those people and jobs are located, we feel will have everything to do with our future livability, sustainability, and even the economic competitiveness of our region with others. We think we want to attract those people and jobs, but we want to have them located in areas that have infrastructure in place or planned so that in turn we can protect our prime farmland and natural resources. So how can we support future preservation efforts? Well, that's the question that we've asked ourselves many times, and it's really why we undertook this study. As I was saying before, many people thought, protecting open space and protecting the environment was maybe something you only did when times were good, and it's kind of a luxury and kind of nice and pretty, but that's about all. Well, we're now able to show the opposite, that again, protecting open space and protecting the environment generates hundreds of millions of dollars in economic activity, and it is a wise public investment that pays us back. And we hope to use the information from this study so that we can reframe the dialogue about open space and environmental protection as a benefit, not just an expense, so that we can raise political and financial support for more environmental protection and open space preservation. So the study was funded by the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, the Lenfest Foundation, Clinial Foundation, and J.P. Mascaro. And it was conducted by a team of consultants that was selected through a competitive process and is the Economy League of Greater Philadelphia, eConsult Corporation, Keystone Conservation Trust, and the U.S. Forest Service. And this team of consultants are people that really live and breathe data and numbers and do things like hedonic regression analysis and input-output modeling and iTree hydro modeling on a regular basis. So if you have any technical questions, I'm probably able to answer them, and if not, I will consult the 500-page appendix. So the numbers that I'm going to present to you are actually pretty big, but in many cases, they're actually conservative estimates. In many cases, we came up with a range of numbers, and we used either the average or the low end of that range. So the study is going to show that open space creates value in 4 different ways. It raises home and property values, it provides ecosystem services that we'd otherwise have to pay for, it provides recreational benefits and avoided health care costs, and it generates economic activity. So let's start with the property values. Well, anyone that's bought a home knows that your home's value is going to be largely based on the number of bedrooms, its structural condition, maybe the school district it's in. Well, it's also going to be based on your proximity to open space. So people are basically people love open space and playground, whether it's playgrounds or scenic areas, they're willing to pay a premium for open space. And altogether, the open space in our region has increased the housing value by $16.3 billion, and that's billion with a B. What that means is if we were to take away all of our open space and replace it with something neutral, then the region's housing stock would fall in value by $16.3 billion. So what does that mean for the average house? Well, the average house that's within 1 mile of open space enjoys a premium of $10,000. Now, the closer it is to the open space, the higher that value is, and the farther away up to 1 mile, the lower it is. But let's look at some particular case studies to see what that really means on the ground. Next slide. So we did a number of case studies, and I'll just go through them really quickly. So the Perkiomen Trail is a 20-mile trail in western Montgomery County, and houses that are within a quarter mile of the Perkiomen Trail are worth $5,000 more than otherwise equivalent houses. The Hopewell Big Woods is a large tract of mostly unfragmented woods on the border of Chester and Berks County, and homes within a quarter mile of the Hopewell Big Woods are worth $8,000 more than otherwise similar houses. Peace Valley Park is a large 1,500-acre park in Bucks County, north of Doylestown. Houses within a quarter mile there are worth $35,000 more than other houses. Clark Park is a 9-acre oasis of a park in West Philadelphia. Houses within a quarter mile of Clark Park are worth $45,000 more than otherwise similar houses. And Radnor Trail. The Radnor Trail is just a 2-mile trail in Radnor Township, and the houses within a quarter mile of the Radnor Trail are worth $70,000 more than other houses just in Radnor Township, which is an affluent township to begin with. So the fact that proximity to open space is so valuable has not been lost on real estate agents who are using this in their advertising. Here's 2 actual advertisements for new houses, promoting the fact that these houses are next to the Radnor Trail, and on the right is the Perkiomen Trail as a selling feature. All right, next is environmental services. Environmental services are also sometimes known as ecosystem services, and these are the things that Mother Nature does for us every day, quietly and gracefully, that we often take for granted. But if she wasn't doing it, then we would have to pay out of pocket to have these same functions performed. There's a lot of things that you can look at when it comes to ecosystem services, but in our region we focused on 6 functions that we thought were especially important for our region. And they are water supply, waste assimilation, flood mitigation, air pollution control, carbon sequestration, and wildlife habitat. And altogether, those 200,000 plus acres of open space are providing a value of $132 million by performing these functions for our region every year. Here's that buffer map again, because we're talking about buffers. So some of these functions are directly related to water supply and water quality. And again, this map shows where open space is providing a buffer for many of our streams. And in fact, out of the stream frontage, about 40% of the stream frontage is surrounded by protected open space, which does not always have a vegetative buffer, but often does, and at least has the opportunity to have a vegetative buffer. So breaking it down a little bit, this open space protects water quality in the value of $61 million a year by allowing for groundwater recharge and filtering out non-point source pollutants before they reach the stream. Again, valued at $61 million that we'd otherwise have to pay more in our water bill for treating it or even for supply because it wouldn't be as readily available. Again, flood mitigation is valued at $37 million a year because open space is keeping people and structures out of harm's way in terms of flooding. And the vegetation on protected open space is providing a value of $17 million a year for cleaning the air and filtering out air pollution. Stormwater management is a big topic in most communities, and we set out to find out, well, how much is this open space providing us in terms of managing our stormwater? For this, we hired the Forest Service because we were not able to do this across the whole region, but we had to do it on sub-watersheds because the numbers change per watershed based on the rainfall and the impervious coverage per watershed. So we picked 4 watersheds that do run the gamut from rural to suburban to urban to kind of get a cross-section. And what the model does is it takes the protected open space in the subwatersheds, it converts it to land developed at the same intensity as the surrounding land uses, figures out how much excess runoff you would have, and then how much it would cost to manage that runoff. Well, oops, okay. So we found out that if just in those watersheds we took away the open space, we'd have another 200 million cubic feet of runoff. And I'm still trying to figure out what that equates to, so if anyone knows, that would really help me. But we know that it would amount to costing $87 million to build the infrastructure to manage it, and another $2.5 million every year to maintain it. And again, this is only for the 4 watersheds that I talked about, which equal less than 10% of the region. We cannot factor that up to 100% because each watershed is different, but I think these numbers give you a feel for the magnitude of savings that protected open space gives us for managing stormwater. So the third category are recreation and health benefits. And here, there's 2 things to look at. One are the recreational benefits. And every time a family uses a park for free, they're saving money because they don't have to pay for it. And we did find out that the average family saves about $400 by having free access to parks. So that's $400 in their pocket that they can use for other necessary things. The really big numbers come with the health benefits. And here we were able to discover, using the SCORP, the Pennsylvania Statewide Comprehensive Outdoor Recreation Plan, the number of people that exercise strenuously about 3 times a week on outdoor parks. And then because these people exercise strenuously and are more fit, they're avoiding health care costs. So because of our parks, we are able to avoid about $800 million in avoided health care costs in our region, avoid $14 million in workers' compensation claims, and again, because these people are generally happier, healthier, more fit, and more alert, and therefore more productive, we are also saving $500 million in lost productivity. The fourth and last category is jobs and revenue. So again, what we have found is that these 200,000 plus acres of open space support a number of jobs in the agricultural industry, park maintenance and management, and hospitality and tourism. And altogether, it's about 7,000 jobs that are supported through our protected open spaces. There's also a lot of money that changes hands because of these open spaces, and is about $566 million a year that in expenditures that changes hands because of the farms, the hospitality, the tourism, or buying the mulch and mulching the park. So there's a lot of money that is generated because of these open spaces. And finally, about $30 million is returned back to local governments in the form of taxes, income, sales, and business taxes. So there's really something for everyone. I mentioned before that we did a couple case studies, and here are the 7 case studies that we did, which I'm not going to go through all of them. I'm just going to touch on 2 of them. But in case any are in your area, you can look up in the report more information about them. But I'll touch on Hopewell Big Woods because of the environmental services that it provides. And it's a 73,000-acre, mostly unfragmented wooded area on the border of Chester and Berks County. And because it's so natural and wooded, it's like a big sponge. And it's soaking up stormwater, runoff, filtering air, all together in the amount of $47 million in value every year that it's cleaning up our air and water. The other one I wanted to mention is Honeybrook Township, which is a rural township on the border of Chester and Lancaster County, and it's an agrarian community that is about 2/3 farmed and has over 1,000 acres that are preserved farms. But what's really significant here is that these farms are at the headwaters of the Brandywine Creek, and the Brandywine serves as a source of drinking water for downstream users, and including the city of Wilmington. And the city of Wilmington has actually paid the farmers at the headwaters in Honeybrook to install agricultural best management practices that will help keep the cows out of the stream and otherwise protect the water so that they can save money downstream in treating it and provide cleaner water to their customers. So where do we go from here? Well, if any of this information is going to be useful to you later on, we have a full report that, again, shows the info by case study and by county, and you can read the report online. And also, I think you all got a brochure, and that the link for the online copy is also in the brochure. Recognize the value. This weekend, weather permitting, maybe go out to your favorite open space or to a new one and look at it with fresh eyes. Maybe you'll now see more of the ecosystem services that are being provided, or some of the health benefits that people are enjoying, or maybe you'll recognize the economic activity that you're generating because of your trip to this open space. Share the story. We've been really grateful to get some really great media coverage on this. We think it's a really positive story, so we want everyone to play it forward. Support local open space initiatives. So, preserving open space requires funding, and we think that it's needed at all levels of government. In southeastern Pennsylvania, we have really put our money where our mouth is, and all of our counties and a third of our municipalities have dedicated funding to protecting open space. So this map shows in different colors the type of funding that has been committed by the county government. The purple is a bond, the green is a property or income tax, and the yellow is out of the general fund, and the blue is a combination of both. And the crosshatch shows the municipalities that have the similar types of dedicated funding for open space. And in our region, actually, 88% of the referendums have been approved, where people have voted to tax themselves to buy up open space. And that compares very favorably with the national rate, which is a 64% approval rate. So that concludes the presentation, and I know that I've thrown a lot of numbers at you, and I don't expect you to remember any of them. If they're useful to you, you can look them up in the report. But I would like to just reemphasize the main point of this presentation and this work is that open spaces are more than just pretty places. They generate hundreds of millions of dollars in economic activity, and they are a wise public investment that pays us back. Thank you.
Patty talked about the economic values of open space from a flood mitigation perspective, and I just thought maybe from the science perspective and how streams function. If you could talk a little bit about how they help us handle increased flooding, flood peaks, flood damages, and the like.
A streamside forest buffer can play a major role in trying to attenuate flooding downstream in a number of different ways. One is that when you remove the land adjacent to a stream from agriculture or from other human activities and plant trees, you basically start converting land that's highly compacted and highly prone to running the water off to land that is now becoming more organically rich and becomes more like a sponge and is able to infiltrate either rainwater directly or surface runoff that's heading towards it. And so when you create the buffer, you're creating a zone of much better soils, much better infiltration capacity. So what you do is you try to channel the stormwater runoff from upslope down. You try to even it out with a grassy sort of transition zone, and then let it flow directly into a riparian forest buffer where it will infiltrate. Now, of course, if it's a huge storm, some of it's going to continue on. But that's where the buffer can play another role, and that is that as the buffer grows up, the trees grow up, they start shedding large woody debris into the stream. And the presence of large woody debris in streams, tree trunks, big tree limbs, and that sort of thing, that infrastructure greatly slows down the rate of movement, the velocity of the water during a storm event. So basically, it keeps the stormwater in the upstream headwater tributaries and preventing it from rapidly moving downstream and causing downstream floodings. And the last part is that I mentioned in my talk that when you plant trees next to a stream that's been historically deforested, you almost immediately, as the trees grow up, start expanding the width of that stream channel. And as you expand the width of the stream channel, the stream is still conveying the same amount of water, the water velocity slows down. And so the peak flood water slows down as it moves downstream. So basically wider streams, wide streams of woody debris keep flood waters more in the headwaters and keep them from moving downstream to a large river. So it plays a tremendous role in attenuating peak floods.
Not that anybody here is interested in politics, of course, but greening can also be to your great political advantage. Not that people in the city of Lancaster, an awful lot of them have never seen the Chesapeake Bay and don't care about the Chesapeake Bay. On the other hand, if you put a park in and put a big sign up that this is part of your greening efforts and it's a brand new park in the neighborhood, suddenly the relationship between neighborhood improvement or streamside improvement, this public housing area that we did the trees and did the riparian buffer, the people are now more attuned to it, but even more important to them, the area is a lot more beautiful, a lot more useful, and a lot nicer. So with everything we do, again, with the integrated infrastructure, we make sure there's a sign that says that this is a green project funded by, whether it's EPA or DEP or who, so that the people begin to recognize the fact that these improvements can be ecologically appropriate, but can also do a heck of a job in improving their neighborhood and improving the value of their neighborhood.
Mayor, based on your experience and what you were saying with the EPA and how it was more or less, you got to solve this, here's fines and penalties and what you need to do, and now there's more supportive of the efforts that you have done. Do you think the government at all levels, top down, maybe should be doing a better job of giving a portfolio of options of things, and is it currently now that they're waiting to see if you come up with creative solutions and then we'll give a thumbs up or thumbs down? Is it backwards to what it should be, or?
This wasn't some epiphany that we had in city government that all of a sudden we realized. The EPA came to us and told us that we could be fined $27,000 a day back to 2008, I think, and put the gun to our head. Now, I tell people, yes, there was the carrot, the stick, but also they're making us do the right thing. I mean, we should have been doing it anyway. Initially, they were hesitant. As things moved on, if you go to an EPA presentation on the Susquehanna Basin or on the Chesapeake Bay, sooner or later a slide's going to come up with the city of Lancaster. And it's basically, can you think anything more bumpkin than Lancaster? I mean, rural Lancaster. And basically, it's if they do it, why can't you do it? So they have now sort of bought in to what we're doing. And they have some vig in the game, too, of us being successful. So it's been positive. One of the grants we got to write our greening program, which is 250 pages, and it's actually interesting. It's not a lot of stuff that non-engineers would fall asleep reading. It's interesting with a lot of explanations. That was done with the idea in mind that that could be used by other smaller municipalities. I mean, there's Pittsburgh and Philly, then there's the rest of us. No offense to Pittsburgh and Philly, but we have to deal with things on a different level. This program that we've developed that's online, or we could provide copies of it, was meant to apply to all smaller municipalities in Pennsylvania. So it's been made available, and they've pretty much endorsed it at this point. Again, they're looking at new regulations where this wouldn't have been recognized previously. They're looking at new regulations to actually formally recognize this and encourage it. So it's a cheaper way of doing the thing, plus there's a lot of side benefits that come along with it.
Do we have any other questions?
Mayor Gray, I just wanted to ask you about what kind of opposition have you run into from development interests in your communities, but specifically related to your usage of buffers?
Well, not a lot of opposition up to this point. In fact, again, we attract people to the city now who want to come into the city because we've developed a reputation in certain circles of being a green city. We have more green roofs and square footage per capita than any other city in the United States right now, and we encourage that. There will be opposition soon, though, and we've spent a couple of years getting ready for it because we're going to impose a stormwater fee. We're going to have to. Generally, for a homeowner, it'll be maybe $7 a quarter that they'll pay. On the other hand, some large parking lots or shopping centers could pay 6 figures for the amount of runoff that they create. Factored into that will be options that they can do to handle their own stormwater on scene and have it infiltrate. We'll work with them. We'll provide money and expertise with them doing it. But I imagine there'll be a lot of discussion when those fees are imposed, and that'll be going to City Council next month. We have been talking about this, and we've had a citizens panel that includes some big developers on it that looked at how you would fund this infrastructure and came to the conclusion that there would have to be some type of fee imposed. It wouldn't be fair to do it through property taxes, wouldn't be fair to do it through additional costs for your sewer. So the only other way we could figure is basically a fee for impervious surfaces. And I imagine we'll get a lot of pushback on that, but we think we're positioned well to explain it. We've had town meetings for the last couple of years. People come in initially sort of aggressive about it and leave with almost a unanimous understanding of what we have to do and why we're doing it. So.
Any questions? Any other questions? I just have two more then. One is I wanted to ask Patty to speak a little bit more to the translatability of your study from sort of the eastern part of the state to the central and western parts of the state, and whether you...
Sure. Well, there have actually, since we've done this study, there have been a number of studies. Berks County did one. I think Lehigh County is ready to embark on one, and I'm not sure about the western part of the state, although some statewide efforts have been done as well, measuring the economic impact of state parks. So again, I think that anytime you do this study, it's really helpful to do it for a local region because people react better to numbers that pertain directly to their region, that it's not, something from somewhere else. So I think it's a good exercise. But I think at the end of the day, wherever it's done, the numbers are going to be surprisingly large because people assume that they were nothing before. So these are all things that can be measured. It's from an economist's perspective, it's what they do, and again, they're real numbers. And I'm sure that I presented a lot of large numbers. People just remember that they're large. They don't remember the actual numbers. Wherever you do this study, they're also going to be large, and that can help emphasize the point of the economic return that protected open spaces give.
And just for Vern, I've heard suggestions that when you're talking about water quality benefits water quality benefits to streams or flooding issues or ecological habitat issues, that you really can have a choice between a buffer and or doing something up the hill, perhaps to deal with water quality issues associated with stormwater runoff. And just when people frame it as a choice between buffers or some other activity up the hill, how do you respond to that?
I always say that in order to mitigate stormwater runoff and flooding and so on and so forth, that it's a concerted effort. It's sort of it's a concerted effort between several best management practices. And so streamside forest buffer is one, terracing is another, grass waterways are another, rain gardens are another, and so on and so forth. And when the question comes up as to, well, which one is more important or which one can we eliminate, I often say that, well, it's like saying, well, which leg of a four-legged stool do you eliminate? Which one's the most important and which one can be eliminated? And the fact of the matter is you can't eliminate any of them. It's a system. You need an integrated system to be effective. And so basically, am I here saying that a streamside forest buffer is all you need to do? And if you put a buffer in, then you don't need to worry about everything you do uphill? No. And if you put something uphill, do you need to worry? You say, okay, we put something uphill, we don't need to put a streamside forest buffer in? No. Basically, you need to have the system in place, and it's the system that's going to be most effective in doing this. And so the science says that you need all those things to be going forward in a unified and concerted way.
Roger, one thing on that, we have a huge amount of farms in Lancaster, dairy farms and whatnot. And every now and then the farmers will point to the city and say, well, they're the ones doing the pollution because we have a point source. It's easily measured. You can see what we're dumping into the Conestoga. You can't see what the farmers are doing really, except on a macro level. I've taken the position We've got our problems, you've got your problems. You solve your problems, we'll solve our problems. And let's not point the finger, let's just deal with it. You know, if you don't do it, it doesn't matter what we do. And if we don't do it, it doesn't matter what you do. So let's get together and just do it.
Any other questions before we close out the forum? Again, I want to thank Representative Vitale for his wonderful leadership in helping to set today up, as well as our sponsoring organizations, the Delaware Riverkeeper Network, Clean Water Action, American Rivers, Penn Future, and the Campaign for Clean Water, Pennsylvania's Campaign for Clean Water. So thank you all so very much, and thank you for coming, and I hope you'll take the packet of materials because it includes some of the science from each of our speakers, as well as some additional information that could be helpful to you. Thank you.